My name is Nour. I'm going to be presenting my dissertation research which investigates the impact of refugees on unemployment. I will firstly be providing some background information and explaining my motivation for choosing this topic. Secondly, the economic theory and some existing empirical literature will be discussed. Thirdly, I'll explain the methodology that I have undertaken, followed by its strengths and weaknesses. I'll be highlighting how my research adds to existing literature, and then concluding by summarising my findings. As you will probably know, refugee inflows are a highly topical and important issue on a universal level. Their occurrences have increased substantially in recent years. Between 1997 and 2016, the number of refugees has almost doubled, from approximately 34 million to 66 million. From a humanitarian perspective, hosting refugees is beneficial and should be encouraged. However, this topic is much more controversial on political, economic, social and cultural dimensions. This is apparent from media coverage, which can be seen from these two extracts from recent news articles in The Guardian and Financial Times. The United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees have defined refugees as people outside their country of origin due to numerous different factors, including race, religion, nationality, social group, political views, violence, disturbance of public order, threats to freedom or physical well-being. Since the unemployment rate stands as one of the most well-known measures of the performance of the labour market, this variable has been chosen to shed more light on how the labour market responds to refugee inflows. The International Labour Organisation's definition of unemployment encompasses people of working age who are actively seeking work within a specified recent period and without work and currently available for work during the reference period. Economic theory focuses more generally on the effects of immigration. The simplest model is often referred to as a canonical model, which assumes homogeneous labour supply. With a downward sloping demand curve, the increase of labour supply reduces the market wage in the short run as all other factors remain constant. Therefore, this model predicts lower wages and higher unemployment for native workers as they are ultimately replaced by cheaper substitutes. However, the canonical model has been challenged on several different grounds. Two arguments will be outlined in my presentation. Firstly, heterogeneity exists among workers regarding their levels of human capital. While workers who most closely match incoming immigrants may be expected to experience losses in employment, others may gain from an ability to complement the different skills and abilities. Also, production processes may become more efficient with the possibility of expanding specialisation and the division of labour. However, education skill levels may not fully capture labour differentiation. Some skills and experience obtained by immigrants may remain tied to their country of origin, since culture and language differ across countries. This raises a concept known as skill downgrading, where human capital levels of immigrants are considered lower in their host countries. This is reflected by immigrants competing with natives of lower skill levels or previous immigrants. Secondly, there is a tendency for native and immigrant workers to occupy different types of jobs. Specifically, it's been highlighted that native workers have a comparative advantage in roles that require high levels of language proficiency relative to immigrants who are relatively more efficient in manual intensive work. So, what does empirical literature suggest? The evidence is mixed. Although the impact of refugees has been studied relatively less than that of immigrants, recent years have seen emerging empirical studies that focus on the former. One important distinction between these two strands of literature relates to the exogeneity that often define refugees. Unlike for immigrants, the timing, magnitude and skill decomposition of refugees do not tend to hinge on economic conditions of host countries, but rather on circumstances relating to their exodus. A potential advantage of this exogenous nature is the ability to conduct econometric techniques that do not require the use of instrumental variables. Analyses of two significant refugee movements will be discussed in this presentation. Firstly, the impact of the Mariel boat lift in 1980, which refers to the mass flow of Cuban refugees predominantly into the city of Miami. The original study of this historical event by Card revealed that its impact was not significant for employment levels of low-skilled natives. However, several limitations of its methodology have been highlighted. Borjas and Monras have argued that its difference in differences approach may bias results due to the likely spillover effects between the treatment and control groups. Perry and Yasinoff also point out econometric issues arising from the choice of control group. Nevertheless, their alternative synthetic control methodology yields results that also align with the findings of COD. Secondly, several studies have examined the impact of incoming Syrian refugees on the labour market of neighbouring countries following the outbreak of the Syrian civil war in spring 2011, which has resulted in the displacement of over 5.5 million Syrians. For example, Cheritoglu Ayel used a difference in differences approach to examine the labour market effects in Turkey. They find overall negative effects on both formal and informal unemployment. On the other hand, Fakih and Ibrahim deduced that Syrian refugees do not have a significant impact on labour market outcomes in Jordan, emphasising the imperfect substitutability of refugees and native workers. To achieve the aims of my research, I have conducted an econometric methodology using panel data for 65 countries across the period 1990 to 2013. Since countries within the sample differ substantially, for example in terms of development, governance and financial institutions, unobserved country effects are expected to be significant. Panel data has been used to control for individual heterogeneity, because otherwise biased regression results may arise. To choose the appropriate panel data estimation technique, I have conducted the following 3 specification tests: an F-test, the Bruch-Pagan LM test, and the Hausman test. Results from these confirm that the most appropriate estimation technique is a fixed effects model. My model also controls for unobserved time effects using year dummy variables. These are effects that vary across time and affect all countries in the sample. The dependent variable in this model is the unemployment rate, which is measured as a percentage of the total labour force. These have been collected from either the World Bank database or the IMF database, depending on data availability for each country. Harmonised ILO estimates are used rather than national estimates to enable better comparability between countries. The independent variable is a natural log of the number of refugees hosted within each country as a percentage of its labour force. Although it would be more appropriate to extract the number of refugees that are of working age, this data is unavailable, and so the aggregate figures have been used, which have been obtained from the UNHCR database. Control variables have also been selected based on theory, empirical literature, and availability of data. These include GDP per capita, inflation rate, minimum wage, secondary school gross enrolment, and government expenditure on education. Data for these control variables have been collected from the IMF, ILO, and World Bank databases. I will now discuss some strengths and limitations of my methodology. One strength of using panel data is that it enables me to incorporate a larger sample size relative to purely cross-sectional or time series data, which would yield results of higher accuracy. Furthermore, it enables me to add to existing literature, which tend to only analyse the effects of refugees and immigrants on one geographical region. This makes the results from my study more applicable on an extensive scale, rather than dependent upon specific cases or regions analysed. As mentioned earlier, data availability is one of the main limitations of this study. Many of the highest refugee hosting countries are those with relatively lower levels of development, which provide the least consistent publications of data. This restricts the number of control variables that can be used in this model and also results in missing values. Therefore, the panel for this study is unbalanced, which reduces the sample size and consequently the precision and predictive power of my results. To conclude, my study investigates the effects of refugees on unemployment. My regression results suggest that refugees have a small favourable impact on unemployment, albeit not statistically significant. These findings that refugees do not have a negative impact on employment, as often perceived to be the case by the public, may be surprising and certainly of interest. Thank you for listening.